Time for a story. Are you ready? Here we go. There was a young woman who went on a wander. She thought it was time to begin her adult life, but wanted to see a bit of the world before choosing her work. Her family, friends, neighbors, and elders agreed that it would be good for her to wander up to as much as a year, but that she should return after that and feed the people with her stories. She was given a small bag and asked to fill it with story objects, items to represent each of the most interesting things she learned or saw. She wanted to walk very far, so she packed only a small pack to carry on her back. She wandered through many different places. She saw amazing things: prairies, mountains, lakes, rivers, marshes, and deep forests with huge trees. And along the way, she met many people with different ways of doing things and different ideas. She learned from everyone, and her story bag began to fill. There was tiny cones to remind her of a gathering where people came together to dance and stretch and sing and play. There was a shimmery piece of shell to help her remember a beautiful island in the middle of a huge lake, and many other special objects and memories. But when she traveled as far as she thought she could go and still get home in a year, she saw something that truly amazed her. By this time, she'd wandered so far that no one spoke her language. Still, the people were welcoming and took her in. She stayed with them, watching them at their daily work. She watched people take care of children and animals. She watched other people building homes or taking care of homes. She watched people cooking breakfast and dinner, and she shared their food. Everything seemed purposeful. Everything seemed to be all about meeting people's needs. But then she noticed a few people who were doing something very odd. Their noses were to the ground, and their butts were up in the air. And now the young woman realized that she'd been seeing this for days. It was such an odd behavior that she had turned away to look at other things. Only when she saw it again did she really look. Now she couldn't ignore it anymore. She had to understand. She walked over to the people near the ground. They sat up and smiled at her. She couldn't ask them about their strange behavior because she couldn't speak their language. She was going to have to try it. So she did. She got on her knees. She bent her nose to the earth and poked her butt up in the air. Then she heard laughter. She looked up. The others were sitting up and they were looking at her and they were smiling. Someone crawled over to her and bent his face down. His nose nearly touched the ground. But when he was close like that, she understood he was looking. The young woman bent again, very close to the earth, and she looked. The big world faded, and the tiny world suddenly became very clear. She saw so many things. There were grains of sand that looked like sparkling gemstones. There were miniature snail shells. There were clover leaves and ants far too small to be noticed from high above. There were tiny animal bones and insect shells shrugged off and left behind. And there were stones in every color of the rainbow. She heaved a deep sigh. She sat up, and the big world came back into focus. She wore a happy smile. Everyone was looking at her. She said, "This is the best thing I've found on my whole journey, but I have to be home soon. How will I ever get home in time? All I want to do is look at the ground." No one understood her words, but everyone understood her meaning, and everyone smiled. The next day, she set out for home. Every evening along the trail, she spent some time gazing at the tiny world, and she was always looking for a story object to represent this learning. But all her favorite items were so small they would surely get lost in the bag. Finally, she found a crystal that looked like a giant grain of sand, so she chose that. At last, she arrived home to her village. For a while, she just rested. Then one day, there was a feast, and afterward, story time. The young woman drew out her first story object, and she told the adventure that she'd had and things that she'd learned. She drew out her second story object, and she told that story. Once in a while, everyone took a break to move around and talk about the marvelous journey that she'd been on and stretch and get a drink. At the very end of the evening, she brought out that crystal and told the people, "This last story is my very favorite." And ever after that night, visitors walking about her village would note with curiosity, once in a while, people of all ages on their knees with their noses to the ground and their butts in the air. And that is the end of the story.